The night was alive with frantic motion. Flashlights cut through the darkness like restless fireflies, their beams scattering across the dense woods of Cedar Run. The air was cold sharp with the scent of damp earth and fallen leaves. Every step crunched on twigs and brittle foliage. Voices called out in strained urgency echoing between the trunks of skeletal trees. Noah. The name broke the night, repeatedly shouted by throats raw with fear. Noah Marcus Whitaker's voice was the loudest, raw and unsteady, trembling with desperation. His boots sank into the mud along the narrow trail as he pushed forward, holding a small scarf in his hand red with faint blue stripes. The scarf shook violently in his grip as though it too was terrified. Behind him, Officer Elena Ruiz raised her flashlight higher, scanning the undergrowth while Chief Dana Walsh barked orders to the search teams fanning out along the creek. The faint glow of the patrol cars in the distance barely reached them, swallowed by the trees. Dogs sniffed at the ground, their handlers urging them forward. Somewhere deeper in the woods, a whistle blew a signal for silence. Everyone froze, listening. Only the creek spoke its soft gurgle, unsettling in the quiet. Then the whistle blew again, a different pitch this time. Nothing found. The search resumed with renewed urgency. Marcus stumbled forward, almost falling, until his eyes caught on something through the brush. A shape, small, upright, utterly wrong. His heart stuttered as he realized what it was, a bicycle standing perfectly balanced on its kickstand in the middle of the trail. The silver frame glimmered beneath a thin coat of mist-green stripes running along its sides. Noah's bike. It hadn't been tossed aside or dropped in haste. It was placed there with care as though its owner intended to return. Marcus fell to his knees beside it, his breath breaking. The forest around him seemed to close in, soundless and oppressive. Officer Ruiz crouched next to him, her brow furrowed, her voice steady but soft. "We'll find him," she said. Marcus didn't respond. His world had narrowed to that single, lonely bike. The camera of our minds lingers on that image, and then the darkness swallows it whole. 24 hours earlier, the world was different. Morning came to Pinebrook in shades of pale gold and misty blue. It was the kind of small-town morning that carried a deceptive peace. The streets were still lined with maples losing their final autumn leaves, the sidewalks glistening with dew. From the chimney of Sweet Crumb's bakery, thin ribbons of smoke curled into the chill air, carrying with them the warm scent of bread and cinnamon rolls. Somewhere down the block a dog barked, not in warning, but in routine acknowledgement of a new day. Inside a modest white house on Birch Street, Noah Whitaker stirred beneath his quilt. The alarm clock on his bedside table ticked quietly before its single chime rang out. He blinked awake, instantly accustomed to early mornings. At 11 years old, Noah had a rhythm all his own, a quiet ritual that began long before most of Pinebrook even opened their eyes. He slipped out of bed and padded across the cool wooden floor, pulling on his worn sneakers and the soft red scarf his mother had given him last winter. In the corner of his room sat a small wooden box filled with old coins, each one meticulously placed and catalogued. Collecting them was his favorite pastime, a small world of history he could hold in his palm. This morning, as always, he selected one special coin, a wheat penny from 1953, to tuck into his jacket pocket, a private token of luck. In the kitchen, a note waited for him on the counter, folded neatly beside a granola bar and a carton of juice. His mother's handwriting curved across the paper with practiced care. "Don't forget your gloves. Smile if you see Mrs. Green. She says you always brighten her mornings. Love, Mom." Noah read it with a small grin, slipping the granola bar into his pocket before swinging his canvas satchel over his shoulder. The house was quiet. Alicia Whitaker had already left for her early shift at the bakery. Marcus, his father, would still be asleep for another hour before heading to the auto shop where he worked. Their lives, though simple, fit together like puzzle pieces, each with its own schedule and obligations. Noah wheeled his bicycle out from the side porch, the tires whispering against the frosted grass. The cold morning air kissed his cheeks as he pushed off the familiar weight of the satchel pressing against his side. The world, at this hour, belonged to him alone. Even the dogs he passed along the route knew him by now. They barked in a friendly way, tails wagging behind chain-link fences. Every stop along his path carried a mark of routine. The faded wind chimes at the Flannery house, the old pickup truck parked crookedly on the corner, the mailbox with the cracked ceramic owl perched on top. Noah delivered each paper with care, folding it precisely, setting it gently on steps or porches. To others it might have seemed like a chore. To Noah it was a small act of order in a chaotic world. One stop was special Mrs. Martha Green's house. A retired schoolteacher with a sharp mind and kind eyes, she always came to the door to greet him no matter the weather. This morning, as he approached, Noah slowed, expecting to see her silhouette in the window, but the curtains remained closed. He hesitated, frowning slightly before leaving the paper neatly on her stoop. It wasn't much, just a moment's pause, but it rippled through him in a way he couldn't name. Routine mattered, and this break in it felt wrong. Further down the route, the world was quieter. The trail near Cedar Run stretched ahead, framed by bare-limbed trees arching overhead like cathedral beams. The creek babbled softly beneath the wooden footbridge, the air tinged with the metallic scent of cold water. This was Noah's favorite part of his morning. He always stopped here, if only for a few minutes, to listen, to think, to feel like the world noticed him back. He leaned his bike carefully against the thick trunk of an elm, its bark rough beneath his fingers. Sitting on the damp grass, he unwrapped the granola bar, chewing slowly as he watched the mist rise from the creek. The quiet here was absolute, save for the occasional rustle of leaves. It felt like a secret shared only between him and the earth. When he finished, Noah brushed the crumbs from his hands and stood. The day was waiting. School was waiting. The rest of his route was waiting. But for reasons even he couldn't articulate, he lingered one heartbeat longer, then another. And then he turned his gaze, drifting toward the narrow path that branched away from the main trail, a path that led deeper into the woods toward the cluster of houses on the far side of Cedar Run. Somewhere down that path lay the house of Harold Benton. Noah had seen him many times, a tall, solitary figure who rarely spoke. Harold's house was always dark in the mornings, its curtains drawn tight. Noah's wave was never returned, but habit kept him lifting his hand each time he passed. This morning, Noah didn't wave. He only stared for a moment, then looked away. Minutes later, the trail behind him was empty. The bike remained where he had left it, standing tall and patient, a silent sentinel. The sun climbed higher, indifferent. And Noah Whitaker was gone. Before we dive deeper into this story, take a moment to subscribe to this channel so you never miss stories like this one. Morning at Sweet Crumbs Bakery began the way it always did, with the hum of ovens, the yeasty warmth of rising dough, and the clinking of trays as Alicia Whitaker prepared for the rush of early customers. It should have been comforting, this rhythm she had built over years of work, a quiet dance of sugar flour and habit. But as the first hints of daylight slipped through the frosted windows, Alicia felt the rhythm falter. Something was wrong. By now, she should have received Noah's picture. Every morning, without fail, he sent her a photo from Cedar Run. Sometimes it was the fog curling low over the creek, sometimes a frozen leaf captured mid-melt, once even a duck perched precariously on the footbridge railing. It was their unspoken ritual, a small connection to remind her he was safe, and that the world, for a brief moment, was simple. Today, there was nothing. At first, Alicia told herself it was a fluke. Perhaps he was running late, or the camera on his old phone had finally given out. But when she called, the line rang endlessly before dropping into silence. A second call, a third. No answer. By the fourth attempt, her hands were shaking so badly she nearly dropped the phone. Her gaze darted to the clock mounted above the bakery counter. Nearly 8. By now, Noah should have been at school, seated at his desk, daydreaming out the window as usual. The thought of his empty chair hollowed her chest. She called the school next, forcing her voice into a steady tone she didn't feel. Mrs. Landry, the secretary at Maple Ridge Elementary, answered with her usual bright greeting. Alicia could hear children's laughter faintly behind her, a sound that cut like glass. When asked, Mrs. Landry's voice faltered. Noah had not been marked present this morning. They assumed he was homesick. A pause, awkward and heavy. Alicia's breath caught as she explained that he had left on time his satchel full of folded newspapers, his routine unbroken until now. The pieces slid together with dreadful clarity. She hung up and dialed another number 1 she rarely called before noon. Marcus answered on the second ring, his voice thick with sleep. "Noah isn't at school," Alicia said, skipping preamble, "and he isn't answering his phone." Marcus was silent for a beat before his voice sharpened. "I'll be there in 15." By the time Marcus arrived, the morning bustle of the bakery had dissolved into tense stillness. Alicia was pacing near the window apron dusted with flour, her face pale. Together, they drove to the school, each minute stretching unbearably. At the small lobby of Maple Ridge Elementary, their worst fears began to crystallize. Principal Hargrove met them with a furrowed brow and an air of practiced calm, while 2 aides hovered nearby, concern etched across their faces. The scent of pencil shavings and chalk dust hung in the air, painfully normal. Chief Dana Walsh entered not long after her presence, commanding, but not unkind. She listened carefully as Alicia and Marcus described Noah's morning, the route, the routine, the photograph that never came. Officer Elena Ruiz joined her, taking notes, asking quiet questions about Noah's habits and whether he might have gone to a friend's house. "Noah never skips a delivery," Marcus said, his voice tight. "Not once." The search began before noon, small groups fanning out along the creek and through the park. Volunteers gathered at the library, receiving instructions under Chief Walsh's steady guidance. There was a strange reverence to the moment, as though the entire town had collectively exhaled and then held its breath. Folding chairs scraped against the floor, flashlights were checked and rechecked, and maps were hastily spread across tables. Martha Green was among the first to volunteer, her lined face set with quiet determination. She had been a teacher for decades, guiding countless children through their first uncertain steps into the wider world. But Noah was different. Noah was hers in a way none of the others had been. He visited her every morning with a smile that reached his eyes. That morning, however, the silence on her porch had been deafening. She mentioned this detail to Officer Ruiz almost apologetically. "He always hands the paper to me directly," Martha explained, clutching her small notebook. "Every day at 7:36 without fail. Today, there was nothing." Ruiz's brow furrowed. "You're certain of the time?" Martha lifted the notebook as proof. Inside, neat columns of dates and notes recorded each delivery, a habit she had carried over from her teaching days. It wasn't merely routine, it was evidence. Ruiz promised to relay this to Chief Walsh immediately. So, the first major breakthrough came just after midday. Near the edge of Cedar Run, a volunteer shouted for assistance. Everyone converged on the spot to find a single item caught on the branch of a low-hanging bush, a red scarf patterned with faint blue stripes. Alicia recognized it instantly. Her knees buckled and Marcus caught her before she fell. The scarf was intact. No tears, no stains, but its presence alone screamed of disruption. Chief Walsh studied it carefully, speaking in low tones to Ruiz. "It's here, but there's no sign of a struggle. Almost like it's snagged by accident." Ruiz shook her head. "Or like someone left it for us to find." The remark lodged itself in Marcus's mind like a splinter. He stared at the scarf, remembering the way Noah had clutched it on cold mornings, the pride he took in something so simple because it had come from his mother. Noah would never abandon it willingly. The search intensified. Volunteers moved through the undergrowth with renewed vigor, their calls echoing into the trees. The sun climbed high, indifferent to the human drama unfolding below. Shadows shrank, then lengthened again as the day wore on. Late in the afternoon, Officer Ruiz returned from the Pinebrook market with a USB drive clutched tightly in her hand. The store had recently installed security cameras, a fact no one had considered until now. The footage, grainy but clear enough, showed Noah arriving at the store just before 7. His satchel was slung across his chest, his hair damp with morning mist. He approached the counter with a folded dollar bill in hand. Then a tall figure stepped into frame beside him, a man wearing a baseball cap pulled low sunglasses obscuring most of his face. The interaction was brief. The man handed something to Noah, a pack of gum perhaps, and Noah accepted it calmly. Too calmly. There was no sign of distress, no glance over his shoulder, no attempt to flee. If anything, his posture suggested familiarity. Ruiz exhaled slowly, replaying the clip for Chief Walsh and the Whitakers. He wasn't taken, she said quietly. He was cooperating. Alicia's hand flew to her mouth. Marcus stared at the screen, struggling to reconcile the boy he saw with the boy he knew. Noah would never willingly vanish. And yet, there he was standing beside a stranger like it was the most natural thing in the world. Chief Walsh placed a steady hand on Alicia's shoulder. We don't know the context yet. It could mean many things. But Marcus heard only one thing: someone had been close enough to Noah to earn his trust. That was worse than any kidnapping. As evening fell, the search regrouped at the library. The air buzzed with theories and fears. Some whispered that Noah had run away. Others speculated about outsiders, drifters passing through town. The name, Harold Benton, surfaced quietly at first, then louder as more people recalled oddities: a light seen flickering in his back shed at strange hours, the way he kept to himself, the trail that led from his property straight to Cedar Run. Marcus remembered passing Harold's house countless times. The curtains always drawn. The man himself rarely visible, a silhouette more than a presence. Noah had mentioned him once, describing how he waved each morning despite never receiving a wave in return. Chief Walsh raised a hand for silence. No accusations, she said firmly, not without evidence. Even so, unease settled over the room like dust. Somewhere outside, the wind rattled the bare branches, carrying with it a single unspoken truth. Pinebrook was no longer safe, and the woods held secrets they had only begun to uncover. If you're intrigued by the mystery so far, remember to subscribe and stay with us until the very end for more chilling tales like this one. The next morning dawned gray and heavy, a sky weighted with clouds that seemed to sag closer to the rooftops of Pinebrook. The town was quiet in a way that felt unnatural, as though the earth itself was holding its breath. Overnight, Cedar Run had frozen along the edges, a fragile rim of ice forming delicate patterns that broke under the smallest touch. The search for Noah continued with renewed urgency. Flyers bearing his photograph were taped to lampposts, pinned to corkboards, and slipped under doors. The boy's face stared back at the townspeople from every corner, his familiar smile now a haunting reminder of absence. Despite the cold, groups of volunteers gathered, early flashlights in hand, their boots crunching on frosted leaves as they set out along mapped routes. Chief Walsh directed them from a central command post set up at the library. She moved between groups with quiet authority, her voice calm even as exhaustion etched lines into her features. Officer Ruiz worked beside her, eyes scanning reports, marking coordinates on maps, always alert for anything that might break the pattern of dread. Alicia Whitaker stayed close to the command center, hands clasped so tightly the knuckles blanched white. Marcus, on the other hand, refused to sit still. He paced the periphery of the search area, his jaw clenched, scanning every shadow as though sheer will could force Noah to step back into the world. As midday approached, an unexpected voice rose above the low murmur of activity. Mrs. Landry from the school had arrived, her face pale and lips pressed thin. She pulled Chief Walsh aside, whispering urgently. Walsh's brow furrowed deeper with each word. When she turned to the crowd, her expression was grave. "Another child has been reported missing," she announced. The words fell like stones into still water. Jaden Park, 10 years old. Last seen walking home from school yesterday afternoon. Gasps rippled through the group. Alicia's knees nearly gave way. Marcus caught her. His own face blanching. Jaden was Noah's closest friend, inseparable since kindergarten. If Noah's disappearance had shaken the town, this new revelation shattered its fragile stability. The atmosphere shifted instantly. Fear became panic, then anger. Neighbors murmured accusations under their breath. Some openly declared what others had only suspected, that these disappearances were connected, that something or someone was hunting their children. By late afternoon, Jaden's backpack was discovered near the same bend in Cedar Run where Noah's bike had been found. It rested against the base of a tree, eerily undisturbed. Inside were a few school books, a half-empty water bottle, and a single pack of gum. Tucked between the pages of a notebook was a small, crumpled piece of paper. The message was written in shaky pencil marks, the words barely legible. He said, "This is where it's safe, where no one can lie if you're quiet." Officer Ruiz read it aloud softly, the sound nearly swallowed by the winter wind. The note's childish scrawl chilled her more than the temperature ever could. It wasn't a plea for help, it was a statement. Chief Walsh exchanged a glance with Ruiz. "This isn't random," she said. "There's intent here." Kian. As night fell, the focus shifted to Harold Benton. His name had been whispered all day, but now those whispers sharpened into pointed suspicion. Neighbors recounted oddities, lights in his backyard shed at odd hours, the strange way he avoided conversation, the side gate that opened directly onto the trail where Noah's bike was found. Walsh had resisted action without evidence, but 2 missing children demanded decisive steps. A warrant was secured before dawn. The search team approached Harold's property in tense silence. The yard was overgrown weeds clawing through the cracked pathway. The house itself loomed in darkness, windows blank and unwelcoming. The shed stood apart, squat, and weathered, a new lock glinting coldly in the beam of Ruiz's flashlight. The lock snapped open under the officer's careful hands. The door creaked, releasing a breath of stale air. Inside, they expected chaos boxes, tools, the clutter of neglect. Instead, they found order. Intentional order. In one corner lay a narrow mattress, its blankets folded with meticulous precision. Nearby, a crate held bottled water and neatly stacked packages of crackers. A lantern hung from a nail, casting a sterile glow over the scene. On a low shelf sat a shoebox filled with coins, each one placed as carefully as Noah's own collection. Marcus recognized them immediately. His breath caught. Atop the mattress rested a single sheet of paper. Ruiz lifted it gently, her gloved fingers trembling. The handwriting was unmistakably Noah's. "If someone isn't safe, you stay where they can't get hurt. I can wait until it's okay." Alicia's sob tore through the silence. Marcus wrapped his arms around her, his own eyes burning. "This wasn't a hideout for Noah," Ruiz murmured. "It was a shelter, a safe place for someone else." The realization hung in the air like frost. Noah hadn't been taken. He had built something. Prepared something. The implications rippled outward, unsettling everyone in the room. Moments later, a call crackled over the radio. Searchers had found Jaden. The boy was discovered in a shallow hollow beneath a tangle of roots near the deeper bend of the creek. The entrance had been camouflaged with leaves and branches arranged with a precision no adult hand would have bothered with. Inside, Jaden sat cross-legged, his face pale but calm, wrapped in a blanket that smelled faintly of cedar and damp earth. He didn't cry when they approached. He didn't run. He simply looked up at the beam of the flashlight and whispered, "You're not supposed to be here yet." Officer Ruiz crouched beside him, speaking gently. "Jaden, where's Noah?" The boy's lips trembled. "He told me to wait 3 days," he said. "Then he'd come back." As they led Jaden from the hollow, Ruiz pressed softly for more information. Jaden hesitated, then explained in halting words Noah had told him about another boy, someone he had seen crying in the woods. A boy who didn't want to be found. Noah had promised to help him to keep his secret safe. When Jaden asked why they couldn't just tell adults, Noah's answer was simple. "They won't believe us. Not until they have to." So when things started to get dangerous, Noah made a plan. He told Jaden to hide in the hollow, to stay quiet no matter what, while Noah disappeared. By the time they returned to the command post, Jaden was wrapped in a thermal blanket, clutching a paper cup of cocoa with both hands. His voice was barely a whisper when he spoke again. "Noah said they'd only look for him," Jaden murmured. "Not me." That was the only way they'd pay attention. His words sank into the hearts of everyone present, heavy with meaning they couldn't fully grasp. Chief Walsh stood very still, her mind racing. She looked at Ruiz. "We've been searching for the wrong thing," she said quietly. "Noah isn't running away. He's leading us somewhere." Ruiz's reply was a whisper. "The question is, where Masua?" Teed. As Jaden was led away to safety, Marcus caught sight of the shoebox of coins again, its contents glinting under harsh fluorescent light. Something deep inside him shifted a memory, surfacing Noah's voice, bright with pride, describing how each coin had a history, a story waiting to be told. Now, those same coins were a message, a trail, a warning. For the first time since the nightmare began, Marcus felt a cold certainty settle over him. This wasn't over. It was only beginning. If you're still with us on this journey and want to uncover the full truth, subscribe now so you won't miss the next chapter of this unfolding mystery. The night after Jaden's rescue settled over Pinebrook like a suffocating blanket. The temperature dropped sharply, hardening the ground and frosting the last stubborn leaves that clung to skeletal branches. Searchlights swept back and forth across the woods near Cedar Run, pale beams struggling against the darkness as if the forest itself resisted illumination. Marcus Whitaker hadn't slept. Sleep was a luxury he couldn't afford, not when each hour seemed to pull Noah further away. He stood at the edge of the command post, eyes raw from fatigue, staring toward the shadowed tree line as though sheer will could pierce the distance. He replayed Jaden's words over and over. Noah said they'd only look for him, not me. That was the only way they'd pay attention. Those words were a key, and Marcus felt they were meant for him. If Noah wanted to be found, he would leave a trail. All Marcus had to do was learn to read it. At dawn, Marcus set out alone, unable to wait for the larger search party. Frost crunched beneath his boots as he followed the main trail toward the bend in Cedar Run, where both the bicycle and Jaden's backpack had been discovered. The air was razor-sharp in his lungs, the silence so complete it seemed to press against his ears. He moved slowly, methodically, eyes scanning every inch of ground. It was there, near the base of an ancient elm, that he saw a crude triangle etched into the bark low to the ground where only a child might leave such a mark. The lines were uneven, carved hastily but with purpose. Marcus's breath caught. Noah's adventurer's mark. It was the same symbol his son had always doodled in notebooks, the same shape that adorned the handmade map Noah once created for a school project. Marcus reached out, brushing the rough grooves with trembling fingers. "Noah," he whispered into the cold air, the name, a fragile prayer. "Ted." The first mark led to another, and then another. They formed a pattern, a breadcrumb trail only Marcus would recognize. Each triangle pointed the way forward, deeper into the woods beyond the familiar paths. The trees grew denser here, their branches interlacing overhead to block out much of the pale morning light. As Marcus followed the trail, memories surfaced unbidden. Noah crouched in the living room explaining the difference between a map and a treasure map, how symbols made sense only if you knew their secret meaning. Back then, Marcus had smiled, indulging his son's imagination. Now, those childish games were the only thing guiding him through the darkness. The final triangle was different. It was larger, more deliberate, carved into a fallen log that stretched across a shallow ravine. Beneath it, the ground sloped down into a hollow space sheltered by tangled roots and heavy undergrowth. From a distance, it looked like nothing more than a dark patch of earth. Up close, Marcus saw the faint outline of leaves arranged with unnatural precision, as though carefully placed to hide an entrance. He knelt, brushing them aside with shaking hands. A small tunnel yawned beneath, barely wide enough for a boy to crawl through. Marcus's heart hammered in his chest. He called softly, almost afraid to break the fragile stillness, "Noah." A rustle answered him, followed by a quiet, steady voice from the darkness. "You weren't supposed to come yet." Isa. The words chilled Marcus, not because they were angry, but because they were so calm. Slowly, carefully, Noah emerged from the hollow. His clothes were rumpled, his hair tangled, but his face was composed, his expression unreadable. In one hand he held a small flashlight, its beam faint and flickering. In the other he clutched a folded piece of paper. Marcus reached for him, but Noah stepped back. "You found the signs?" Noah said softly. "I thought only you would." Marcus swallowed, struggling to keep his voice level. "Why, Noah? Why did you do this?" For a moment, Noah didn't answer. He stared past his father toward the trail as though expecting someone or something to appear. Then he held out the paper. Marcus unfolded it with trembling fingers. On it was a rough sketch of the woods dotted with the same triangular symbols. At the center was a single word scrawled in uneven letters. Safe. Che. When they returned to the command post, Chief Walsh and Officer Ruiz listened in silence as Noah began to speak. His voice was quiet but steady, like a boy reciting a story he had rehearsed in secret for far too long. He told them about the first time he saw the other boy, a figure half hidden among the trees, shoulders shaking with silent sobs. Noah had tried to approach, but the boy had vanished like smoke. The next morning he saw him again, closer this time, and noticed the bruises on his arms, the way his eyes darted in fear. Noah never learned the boy's name, but he understood one thing: the boy was hiding from someone, and he was terrified. "No one believed me," Noah said, gaze fixed on his hands. "I told Jaden, but he didn't see him. I thought, if I made a place where he could hide, maybe he wouldn't have to run anymore." That was how the hollow beneath the roots was born, a secret sanctuary built from scraps and leaves, stocked with food Noah saved from his own lunches. But then Harold Benton discovered it. Harold had begun appearing along the trail at odd hours, his figure lingering near the creek like a shadow. Noah became certain that Harold was the one the boy was hiding from. Fear sharpened into determination. "I couldn't just wait for something bad to happen," Noah whispered. "So I made a plan." He explained how he staged his disappearance, leaving his bike carefully upright, scattering clues that only Marcus would recognize. By vanishing, he forced the adults to pay attention, to look closely at the woods and the people around them. Jaden had been part of the plan too, told to hide so no one would suspect him. But when Jaden went missing, the plan began to spiral beyond Noah's control. As Noah's story ended, silence filled the room. Chief Walsh's face was grave, her mind racing through possibilities. Officer Ruiz knelt beside Noah, her tone gentle. "The other boy, the one you were trying to help, where is he now?" Noah shook his head, eyes glistening. "I don't know. I haven't seen him since that day. I thought he'd come back when it was safe." The weight of those words settled over everyone present. Somewhere out there in the deep, cold heart of Pinebrook's woods, a frightened child might still be hiding, or worse. Marcus wrapped his arms around his son, holding him tightly. For the first time in days, Noah allowed himself to lean into the embrace. But in the corner of the room, Chief Walsh exchanged a glance with Ruiz. There was another layer to this mystery, one that hadn't yet been uncovered, and Harold Benton's shadow loomed larger than ever. The morning after Noah's return was brittle and cold, the kind of cold that seemed to seep into bones and linger. Frost clung to every surface, turning Pinebrook into a landscape of fragile glass. The world looked still, almost peaceful, but beneath that thin veneer, the town was unraveling. Harold Benton was gone. Chief Walsh and Officer Ruiz were the first to arrive at his house that morning. The curtains, always drawn tight, hung open, now fluttering slightly in the draft from a cracked window. The front door stood ajar as though left in a hurry. Inside, the rooms were sparse and impersonal. There were no family photographs, no clutter, nothing to suggest a life lived here, only a lingering smell of old wood and cold ash. The search of the property was methodical. Walsh moved through each room with a flashlight, her boots whispering against the warped floorboards. The kitchen was spotless. The living room held only a single worn armchair facing a blank wall. It felt more like a stage set than a home, a place designed to appear ordinary, but empty of real human warmth. In the back, Marcus found a door partially hidden by a faded curtain. It led to a narrow hallway, and at the very end, a small closet. Inside, beneath a stack of folded rags, he saw them a pair of tiny boots, scuffed and muddy laces tied neatly in perfect bows. For a moment, Marcus simply stared. His breath came shallow, his pulse loud in his ears. These were not Noah's boots. They were smaller, younger. He knelt, reaching out with trembling hands, but stopped short of touching them. Behind him, Ruiz's voice was low-edged with disbelief. "Whose are those?" No one answered. The question seemed to hang in the stale air, unanswered and unanswerable. Beside the boots, Marcus noticed a scrap of paper folded once stained at the edges. He unfolded it carefully. A simple triangle had been drawn in pencil. Noah's symbol, unmistakable but different somehow. The lines uneven, hesitant, as if drawn by a hand unfamiliar with the mark. Marcus's throat tightened. He turned to Walsh, holding up the paper. "This isn't Noah's," he said hoarsely. "Someone else drew this. Tell you." By noon, Harold Benton's disappearance was the only thing anyone in Pinebrook could talk about. Some swore they had seen his truck leaving town before dawn. Others claimed he had been spotted walking toward the woods alone, carrying something long and heavy wrapped in canvas. With no solid evidence, every theory flourished, each one darker than the last. The official search expanded, but Harold was nowhere to be found. It was as though he had dissolved into the mist, leaving behind only questions. Alicia clung to Noah, unwilling to let him out of her sight. She sat on the front steps of their house with him wrapped in a blanket, watching volunteers come and go. Noah was quiet, withdrawn, his eyes fixed on the horizon, as if still searching for someone only he could see. Marcus moved between home and command post, his body present, but his mind tangled in the clues he couldn't piece together. The boots, the drawing, the empty house. It all pointed toward something terrible, yet the final picture refused to form. Chick. At dusk, the search teams shifted focus to the ravine behind Harold's property. The trees there grew close together, their bare branches like skeletal arms reaching upward. It was a place of deep shadows where even flashlights seemed to falter. The shed they had once searched now stood open, its lock discarded in the dirt. Inside, the mattress and crates remained untouched but somehow more sinister in the failing light. Ruiz crouched to examine the floor, tracing faint scuff marks that led from the shed to a narrow trail descending into the ravine. "Something was dragged through here," she said softly. "Recently." Marcus followed the marks until they vanished into the darkness. His gut twisted. Whatever Harold had been hiding, it had been here close enough for Noah to sense its presence, to fear it. Later that evening, Noah sat with Chief Walsh and Officer Ruiz. His small hands twisted in his lap as he answered their gentle questions. Noah Ruiz asked, "Are you sure it was Harold you saw with the boy?" "Think carefully." Noah's brow furrowed. "I saw someone grab his arm," he said slowly. "I didn't see his face, just his hands. They were big, strong, like Harold's." Walsh exchanged a glance with Ruiz. "Could it have been someone else?" Noah hesitated, then shook his head. "I don't know. I just wanted to help him. I thought if I disappeared, everyone would finally look." His voice cracked on the last word, and Alicia, sitting nearby, wrapped her arms around him. She whispered soothing words, though her own tears betrayed her fear. Marcus turned away, unable to bear the sight. Noah had done all of this out of love, out of a desperate need to protect. But in doing so, he had drawn them into a labyrinth of shadows with no clear way out. Joy. The following dawn was sharp and bright, the kind of morning that should have signaled hope. Instead, it carried the heavy weight of unanswered questions. Marcus returned to Harold's house one final time. The silence there was absolute oppressive. He stood in the empty doorway, staring at the faint scuff marks on the floorboards, the hollow spaces where furniture should have been. This was no home. It was a shell. As he turned to leave, a sound drifted through the stillness, a faint echo so soft he thought at first he had imagined it. It was high-pitched, fragile, like the distant laughter of a child. Marcus froze, every muscle locking. The sound came again, carried on the wind from somewhere deep in the woods. When he rushed outside, the yard was empty. Only the trees swayed indifferent. He looked back at the house one last time. The door creaked slowly shut behind him, cutting off the view like the closing of an eye. Theater. That afternoon, life in Pinebrook attempted to resume its shape. People returned to their routines, though none of them fit quite right anymore. Noah bundled in his scarf, mounted his bicycle once again. The newspapers in his satchel rustled softly as he pedaled the familiar route stretching before him. Alicia watched from the porch, her gaze tender but wary. Marcus stood beside her, one hand on her shoulder. They didn't speak. Some things were beyond words now. As Noah reached the edge of Cedar Run, he paused. The creek glittered under the pale winter sun, unchanged and yet forever altered. He glanced back toward his parents, then forward again, his face unreadable. He dropped the first paper neatly on Mrs. Green's stoop, just as he always had. The sound of the bike bell rang out clear and bright, a fragile thread connecting past and present. Tiens. In the final shot of the day, the camera of imagination drifts upward. We see Noah riding through the quiet streets, his small figure dwarfed by the vastness of the town. The view lingers on Harold Benton's abandoned house, its windows dark and empty. Then, from somewhere deep within the trees, a faint, unmistakable sound rises, the echo of a child's laughter, thin and distant, like a memory that refuses to fade. The story ends not with resolution, but with unease, a reminder that some secrets never truly stay buried. Subscribe now to follow more stories filled with suspense secrets and unforgettable twists.